Physician-assisted death is distinguished from euthanasia by the person who performs the action that results in death. With euthanasia, it's the physician themselves who will administer the lethal substance. Whereas in physician-assisted death, the physician provides the means or substance, but it's taken or administered by the patient.
So that's Canadian Medical Association meeting in Ottawa and some of the comments that are being made. And the meeting's focusing this year on end-of-life care. So it's not just all about euthanasia, but it might include palliative care and those kinds of things. But in the end, the politics get into it and it's end of life. So joining us to discuss this, Jack Fonseca joins us, Project Manager at Campaign Life Coalition, and Kevin Godet. Welcome to the show, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
First time as a contributor on the show. Welcome. Let's start with you, though, Jack, because sure. I want to talk about what the focus you think will be at the CMA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's going to be, you know, generally speaking, on the progressive or liberal side of it, those voices tend to be the loudest. They are very passionate about legalizing euthanasia and assisted suicide, and they're probably bound to be very loud on this issue. So they're going to be lobbying to say that, hey, if and when the courts declare that euthanasia should be legal, we should get behind this. We should say that we'll support it. And of course, I'm totally opposed to that. I think it's destructive to individuals and destructive to society and to the medical profession itself.
Mm. You're suggesting then that the loudest will prevail. Is it the majority view?
I don't think it's necessarily the majority view. There's a lot of quieter doctors who perhaps are people of faith themselves, and just disagree with the concept that in a civilized society we should allow some people to kill other people. And I think it's important to differentiate off the bat for your viewers that there's people often get confused, and it's deliberate on the part of the suicide lobby, between refusing medical treatment that's keeping you alive, like an oxygen machine, and actively having a doctor lethally inject you and kill you with that lethal injection. In the one case, you know, it's already a right that you can refuse life support treatment. So an oxygen machine, you can refuse that. You don't need any new laws for that. So if you want to pass away from if you feel it's a burden, it's overly burdensome, and you want to let nature take its toll, that can already happen right now.
And the doctor's role in that case is to make your situation as comfortable as possible?
As comfortable as possible. Whereas euthanasia or assisted suicide, well, let's say euthanasia, the doctor gives you a lethal injection of some poison substance that kills you, so he administers death. So it's the difference between letting grandma die from natural causes and shooting grandma in the head.
Wow.
On that note.
Yeah, where are you going to go with that? Well, no, his point's well made. It is a killing, it's just less bloody.
Well, there are two things I think that have come out of the CMA, the Medical Association meeting so far. And the first one was a poll that shows, not surprisingly, that as the population ages, the older you get, and there's increasing numbers of us getting old, as 17% of the population are now seniors, there's now a call for a national strategy on senior care. Now, who can lead that and what that'll entail, of course, they're silent on, and politicians are usually pretty weak in dealing with these types of issues. And the second issue, I'm not sure, I saw a report before I came in, actually, I'm not sure, Jack, if you saw it, that it said that the CMA voted already this morning, because this morning was the debate on the motion on euthanasia, to defeat it. It was reported that it was narrowly defeated, which is a further indication that this is a divisive, sometimes intractable conversation. But for your benefit, I would say that would be a victory, if you will, for now, for folks on your side. Having said that, though, the challenge that we face just is that as we get aging populations, larger numbers of people who can make either beforehand or at the time, assuming there's a level of sanity or competence, may wish to end their lives or have their lives ended. And one doesn't say it lightly, one doesn't do it easily or simply, but it is a good reason why I think the Supreme Court needs to render a decision on this. Not that I have all stock in the Supreme Court, but it would be helpful. But more importantly, I think Parliament ought to talk about this. How do we have this conversation? I think that the gray area where there are circumstances just is difficult about how we handle this issue.
I don't know about you, Jack, but I'd rather keep it out of the Parliament, and I'd rather keep it out of the courts and let the doctors make their own judgment, and I think they'll prevail.
Well, I mean, we already have euthanasia and assisted suicide are already considered acts of homicide under the Criminal Code of Canada. So the law is the law. And I don't think...
But it's about to go before the Supreme Court of Canada. It's the law until it's not the law. And our Parliament's supposed to reflect the wishes of the majority of the population, and hopefully they could do that in a mature fashion. God knows they have bad track record on doing that. But again, and I'm mindful I'm interrupting you, there really are some genuine hard cases when individuals are severely impeded in life. They choose for themselves to recognize they think their quality is diminished, and they're actively deciding they would like to have some plan to end their own life. Thank God I'm not there, but I don't want to dismiss easily or lightly the growing number of people who say, and are competent, that they would like to do that. And I think we need to have a real conversation. The medical community continues to have this conversation about how do they do it.
Choice prevails. Patients.
Well, let freedom reign at some point, to some extent.
Well, the government also has a duty to protect the general welfare of its citizenry, and death is a threat to the life of its citizenry. And I have total empathy for people, someone who's perhaps terminally ill and has an unbearable pain, but the treatment for suffering is not killing. We need to care for those people. And depression, we know this from research, depression is a primary risk factor for requests for euthanasia and assisted suicide. So the solution is not to kill the patient, it's to care for them. It's to deal with the depression that's underlying this request for euthanasia or assisted suicide. And often people make this request in a moment of weakness. They're lonely, they're depressed, they don't have the support system around them, the support of family and friends. Maybe they're shut away in an old age home and they're not being cared for properly. So what our government needs to focus on is giving the support system to these folks so that to deal with their depression, to build support around them so that they don't request euthanasia and assisted suicide.
Okay, we've got to put it on hold for just 2 seconds, but keep those thoughts. We'll be right back. And we're back. Jack Fonseca here, as well as Kevin Goodett. And Jack finished on the, treat, don't kill kind of a theme. I think that's a fair paraphrase.
Care, don't kill.
Yeah, care, don't kill. What do you make of that?
Well, I think there's ample room in our healthcare system, and this is why the CMA passed the motion this week talking about a need for a national care strategy. We do such a bad job of end-of-life care. There's clearly plenty more room, and let's start with the low-hanging fruit. Let's provide better end-of-life care, better palliative care, better home care, better long-term facilities, so that fewer people are in a position where they're feeling depressed or feel like they have no options.
Yeah, but
that's a good
time,
beginning.
You know where it's going, depending on the disease. Cancer. Eventually you're going to die from it, and it's a function of picking out how you want that to happen at the end.
Well, if I can interject there, I talked about the risk factor for depression, and that's really it's unfair to take advantage of vulnerable people in that situation by having it legal and having it look like a respectable option. Depressed people may make a decision in a moment of weakness that results in their death that otherwise shouldn't happen. Then with respect to pain, and this is where a lot of people struggle, maybe we may have family members who've been in the situation of, they're dying or they have tremendous pain. And the thing is, in Canada, we've not done enough with pain management techniques. There's modern pain management techniques that are not widespread and available in every community in Canada and all the hospitals. We don't have proper palliative care services throughout this country. It's simply not available. So what the government should do is focus on improving palliative care and train more medical professionals on modern pain management techniques, because if people aren't feeling the pain, they may not want to end their lives. So that's the low-hanging fruit.
But they may. There's lots of situations where it's not pain, it's a decision on quality of life.
So I guess I'm assuming the answer to the question. Is it the case that there's no scenario in which an individual could choose? Let's forget for a moment, play a scenario here. Mm-hmm. Is there no scenario in which an individual could choose ahead of time while they're fully competent? A scenario in which where they would like to have assistance, whether or not it's access to pills or whatever the heck that mechanism is. Is it not possible for an individual to decide, say now, me, 45, 40, whatever I am, in the future, that this is a scenario under which if I lost all my limbs, et cetera, or I was vegetative state, or any number of ways, do you believe that there's no scenario in which an individual could choose for themselves, their freedom of choice for themselves?
Yeah, I do. I think there's no situation for the common good of society and to protect the individuals, most especially the disabled community and people who suffer, and the elderly. we already have a growing problem of that's rampant throughout Canada of elder abuse, where you've got grown children taking advantage of their elderly parents, swindling their bank accounts, getting them to sign all kinds of statements, taking them to the bank and manipulating them. And you know, you imagine the abuse that's going to happen when these types of people will have the tool of legal euthanasia and assisted suicide to manipulate their elderly parents into agreeing to this or even requesting it so they can get their inheritance early. That's a fact. That will happen. There's no stopping it. We can't control it now when euthanasia is illegal. How could we possibly try to contain it when it's legal? And the other thing is the progression. Euthanasia and assisted suicide has an expansionary effect that moves from categories of killable people to new categories of killable people to new ones until everyone who wants to be killed can be killed. And that's happened in every jurisdiction in the world. In the Dutch, in the Netherlands. In 1984, it was de facto legalized for the narrow case of terminally ill patients.
So that reverses the very question you asked him. Isn't there a risk when you open the floodgates?
I've made it very clear. For me, this is an open and complicated question. I wish I could take a very categorical position on it, but I don't. I can't. But I'm mindful that we have a law passed in Quebec that entertains the many people think that it allows for euthanasia. We've got a Supreme Court decision pending based on a court case in British Columbia. There's a hodgepodge of problems going on in the country. I think that these questions actually need to be resolved, and it would be ideal if you had the same process across province to province, which was also consistent with federal criminal law. And right now we're seeing problems where it's not, and these issues are presenting themselves. I don't think, respectfully, that it's as simple as we can always say no, although that may be the ultimate outcome. Having said that, again, there's just too many people who are competent who seem to want to make this decision for themselves. And the question is it possible for us to create a scenario under which that could be undertaken? And I don't think that answer is settled at this point in time.
I believe it's not possible. And part of the reason why is, a big part of the reason why is we live under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, where you know, this equality regime dominates. And if we allow euthanasia and assisted suicide in one case, for let's say the case of terminally ill patients, because of their unbearable suffering, a court, activists, the suicide lobby, you name it, will eventually say, they will reason through that process of logic that we can't say that the suffering of this one person who's terminally ill is more worthy and meritorious than the suffering of someone who's depressed, of a teenager who's depressed, of someone who lost their spouse and wants to end their lives.
The problem with the charter, you're forcing me into the freedom of my own choosing. That you're saying the charter can then infringe upon my rights to decide for myself what I want to do, and I think those diametrically oppose one another.
You can imagine what the doctors are discussing now. Jack, thanks so much. Kevin, thank you.
Thanks,
Jack
Pat.
Fonseca with the Campaign Life Coalition, and Kevin Gaudet as well.